Alright, welcome back guys. So in this video we're now going to talk about the next primal emotion, or primal frequency. And this one is probably a little bit less intuitive, right? This is one that I theorized to actually exist. But when I theorized it to exist, then I started thinking in terms of it, and I feel like I could see it everywhere. Like there was a lot of things that had proven it to me that, oh yeah, this is real. And I feel like a lot of people don't know about this one, And so I theorized this to exist. Basically, exactly what I was saying in one of the other videos. I was saying how when I first realized that the body charged emotions, right? I understood there was only certain emotions it charged. There were certain emotions that were different because I noticed how fast they were coming in, how fast they were charging. The mind doesn't charge things that fast, right? So I knew there was something different about them, and then I realized, oh, the body must be charging them. And then as I studied that and started thinking in those terms, I realized the body charges certain emotions. We've been calling them primal emotions. They charge way faster than the emotions that aren't primal, so one's charged by the mind. So I recognized the behavior of primal emotion. So I knew it happened with anxiety. I knew it happened with sexual emotion. But when I started thinking those terms, I was like, I feel like there's another one that it's happening with, right? And that was one that I started calling the danger emotion. That's kind of not a great name because it reminds you of anxiety, but there's a reason I call it that, right? That's kind of what it felt like to me. So just to go over this first point, well, when you hear the term danger emotion, it feels like anxiety, right? You assume, well, when you're in danger, you feel like something's a threat, then that'll induce the anxiety frequency. But that's not always true, right? And so the reason why is that in this first point. So the body has two main. This is what I believe, right? This is my theory. So the body has two main threat assessment levels, right? So there's a high threat assessment level and a low threat assessment level. The high threat assessment level, that's the one that creates anxiety. So when you feel you're in danger and there's something that's a really high threat to you, you're going to feel very anxious, right? And it's a terrible feeling, right? You feel very bad, right? It doesn't feel good. But then there's a low threat assessment level. And ironically, that actually results in a mildly enjoyable feeling, right? So it's kind of strange, it's counterintuitive, right? But the danger frequency or the danger primal emotion, which again is different from anxiety, that one actually feels a little bit good, surprisingly. Now, that feeling is the emotion associated with that frequency, which is induced and charged by the body, right? It's similar to the feeling of risk, or it's similar to the feeling of gambling, right? So it actually can feel exhilarating in a way, right? It feels exciting. When you gamble, right, or when you're taking a risk, if you really focus on how you're feeling, it's like something can go wrong, but at the same time, you kind of like it. You like the chance of succeeding, right? The possibility of succeeding versus the possibility of failing. There's just something about it that feels kind of fun or exhilarating or exciting to you, right? And there's a reason why that is. And there's also a reason why it comes from the body. So that has to do with the second point, right? But yeah, just to kind of cement the idea, that feeling of risk is basically the feeling of the danger frequency basically feels very similar to like when you're taking a risk, right? Now the danger emotion, where I believe it comes from and why the body does that is that it's meant to counteract anxiety, so in order to help you take some risk to survive. Because basically the anxiety frequency is meant to it's basically meant to squash your confidence or squash your self-belief in yourself. Excuse me, it's meant to squash your self-belief in order to cause you to flee from danger, right? It wants you to not believe in yourself because that can cause problems too. If you believe in yourself too much, right? If I see a bear and I'm like, I can wrestle the bear and like knock it out, right? That's a stupid belief, right? That it's not good to do that. Now confidence is a positive emotion. I feel good when I feel confidence, right? But you see in that situation, obviously it's very dangerous for me to lean into that good feeling of confidence and feeling strong. So the body has a vested interest in trying to squash that feeling in certain circumstances. So it's important. However, it's also important that survival is not always best or ensured from running away from the threat, right? Sometimes survival is ensured by leaning into taking a risk or challenging the threat, right? And so if I'm in the wild, right, I need to get some fruit from a high tree. That's a risk. But I need to, if I feel anxiety for that, I'm gonna run away, right? But if I feel too much anxiety, what's gonna happen, right? I'll never get any food. I'm not gonna go any tree to get the fruit. I'm not gonna hunt the animal for meat, right? I'm not gonna do anything. I'm not gonna go after a potential mate because I'm afraid of rejection or something, right? I'm never gonna take risk needed to ensure my survival and the survival of the species. So the body has to counteract that. It can't rely on anxiety all the time. Sometimes it has to ensure that a person takes a risk. And to do that, it needs to make it feel a little bit good. That's where this frequency comes from. So the danger emotion causes you to feel somewhat good when you take a risk. That's why people like to gamble, right? That's why gambling can even be an addiction. So physically, what I think happens is when you take a risk, I think dopamine goes into your brain. It makes you feel good. So that's basically the physiological response to the danger emotion. So the physiological response to anxiety is the release of cortisol and adrenaline. That makes you feel like you're having a rush. And then emotionally, you feel the negative emotion of anxiety. But the physiological response to the danger emotion is basically, I believe, is associated with dopamine. And it makes you feel a little bit good. And like you're taking a risk. It makes you very focused on the risk-like aspect of it. So you know when you have succeeded, which then dopamine, I believe, is released. This is just my beliefs. I'm not a neuroscientist or whatever, but I had done some research on it. I think that's what happens. So when it makes you very focused on the risk aspect, and you know whether you failed or succeeded, and your subconscious alters your perception to very much focus very strongly on that paradigm of risk or success or failure, right? So you're thinking very much in terms of those two outcomes. You don't normally think of everything's not that binary, right? But this frequency alters your perception to alter your logic to think in very binary terms. Right, and that's because the purpose of it is for you to take a risk and try to focus on whether you succeeded or failed. And so that's basically what this does. Now this, because of the danger emotion, because it makes things that feel, well, before I even get into that, right, I'll just go here. Because the danger emotion actually feels a little bit good, right, and because, I'm basically going over this next point. So since the danger emotion feels somewhat enjoyable, and because the body charges subconscious energy so much faster than the mind, the entertainment industry generally, loves this emotion. So in most entertainment media, it's generally trying to influence your intention. It's trying to influence you so you produce a specific intention that induces this frequency, the danger frequency. Because when your body charges the danger frequency, you feel a little bit good. It's not entirely good, right? But you feel mostly good. It's mostly pleasurable. And so entertainment media will generally, we talk more about how when you're watching something, it affects your intention. We'll talk about that in chapter 7. There's a lot to say about that. But for now, you could just know that when you're watching certain things, it could cause you to produce a specific kind of intention. And that will, in turn, will quantize your subconscious to start charging at a specific frequency and compelling you in a certain way. So pretty much almost all entertainment media uses the danger emotion. It's like the all-purpose seasoning of emotions or subconscious energy. Because unlike the sexual emotion, the danger emotion also has no care for the subject. So you could focus on anything and charge this emotion. The entertainment industry uses sexual emotion too, right? So why they say sex sells, but it's limited by the subject. So you're not always going to be able to show like a naked girl somewhere or a guy, whatever chicks are attracted to, right? So you can't use it that much. This you can use everywhere. The subject doesn't matter. So, and you see it in the fact that movies, lyrics and music, video games, just stories you read, sports, all of them include some feeling of conflict, some feeling of risk. Something has to be at risk to make it more enjoyable, right? So when people are telling stories, like in books and movies and TV shows, they generally want to. You probably have heard this or learned this in English class in school, right? There's usually some conflict of some kind in the story that just makes it more interesting, right? But what's really happening is the purpose of the conflict is the part of the story that helps to activate this emotion, or helps to cause you to produce an intention that activates this emotion. Then at some point in the story, you're going to feel like, oh, there's a risk of loss, or there's a risk of loss of success. Your subconscious charges, you focus way more on the story, so you have transcendental imagination, basically, and you're still doing that while you're watching the story in the real world. So the imagination, you're more immersed in the story, and the story becomes more vivid and intense to you. The emotion charges, and you think in very binary terms. But more specifically, you're just highly focused and immersed on the story when that happens. So in other words, you're entertained, right? So you're entertained by the story, and this can happen very fast because the body's the one charging it. So the mind charges way slower. So entertainment industry, it has more trouble trying to entertain you by getting you to charge through the mind. So the body's like a shortcut, right? So like I said, that's why they say sex sells, because that also happens with the sexual emotion. It's a shortcut. It doesn't take long at all to charge sexual emotion through the body. But for the danger emotion is the same way. It doesn't take long at all to charge the danger emotion through the body. So the entertainment industry generally loves to go here. If it relied on getting you to charge emotions through the mind, or entertain you really just through the mind, that just takes way too long. You know what I mean? It wouldn't be as effective. So they love using this in pretty much every form of entertainment media. And I want you guys watching to start really thinking in these terms and just look at all the entertainment media you consume. And you're going to notice that there's always this aspect almost everywhere, right? Something's trying to get you to invoke this feeling of risk or a mild form of danger. Now, before I move on, something I did want to say earlier is that I kind of alluded to it when I mentioned the thing about the subject, how this doesn't care about the subject at all. But just remember, the threat assessment level has absolutely nothing to do with the actual threat. It's just based on how the mind perceives it. So, like for me, public speaking, I can produce an intention that asserts it's a high threat. And I'm not doing it consciously, obviously, but there's a specific intention that I produce that my subconscious will read and say, oh, this is a high threat assessment level. So that results in anxiety. On the other hand, I could be doing something that's way more dangerous, right? Like surfing a car, right? I could do car surfing, which could kill me, right? But if I produce a particular kind of intention, I'll do it in a way where the subconscious looks at the frequency, says, oh, this is a low threat assessment level. And so it'll make me feel the sense of risk, right? Which I'll feel exhilarated. And it'll be enjoyable for me it'll feel adventurous, right? For me to be surfing a car, right? But if I correctly see car surfing as a high threat, then I'll feel anxiety and it won't feel fun. But if I see it as a low threat, I'll feel fun. It'll feel fun car surfing, even if it potentially kills me. So that's why you see some people, generally young guys, take stupid risk like that. It's because of this emotion. And so sometimes this emotion obviously works in a counteractive way from what it's meant to do, right? It could cause a person to take a risk that's very dangerous and see the risk as fun, which is actually counteracts or reduces the chances of survival. So it counteracts the purpose of what it's meant for. Now, going back to this, though, this is a theory I have. I don't know if this is true. It would require research to see if it is, but I believe, just to read the line here, it says, but it potentially may increase anxiety over time due to overstimulation of the brain. And I'm talking about entertainment. So what I mean by that is, my theory is that the downside or the problem with playing too many video games, if you play too many video games, watch too much sports, watch too many movies, listen to music doesn't do it as much. Music's a little different, but it can do it sometimes. Certain types of music do it way more. But yeah, if you listen to types of music that do it, or you read certain books, or just things you do in the real world, right? You take certain risks in the real world. If you're continuously doing things that stimulate the danger emotion in your mind, your brain is constantly pumping dopamine and certain neurological chemicals to continuously stimulate this feeling. And I believe that over time, what actually happens is your brain starts to develop a little bit of a tolerance to it, right? It's overstimulated. In a normal life or some animal in the wild, right, this is not going to be stimulated anywhere near as much. Now, what I noticed in my life, right, is that this frequency, I mean, it kind of makes sense based on how we define things, but I've noticed that when I feel the danger emotion, I don't feel, it's like it's harder for me to feel anxiety, right? It's much harder to feel anxiousness. So just looking at the physical body, now we talked before about antithetical emotions, right? So certain emotions are harder to charge when other emotions are charging, right? Every negative emotion is antithetical to every positive emotion. But what I've noticed that the danger emotion, anxiety emotion are antithetical in the body. So when your body chooses to charge danger, it's just has less of affinity for charging anxiety. You just don't feel it as much. And when you charge anxiety, it has a less of affinity for charging danger. And that makes sense because they have opposite purposes. So what I feel like is when people continuously consume media and they're constantly charging this emotion, it ends up reducing their sensitivity to those same neurochemicals. And then what's left is that they have a increased affinity for anxiety. So in other words, if you continuously focus on entertaining yourself over the years, doing it year after year after year, eventually you're going to notice that it's just easier for you to become anxious, or you feel anxiety more easily, right? And that's because your danger emotion is starting to plummet. Your body's ability to charge it is starting to weaken, right? And so that makes the danger emotion easier to charge in its absence. That's a theory I had. I don't know if that's true, but I just feel like that's a potential possibility. So yeah, what I also wanted to say is that we haven't really talked any about it almost at all yet, but when you learn how to charge your emotions, like through your mind, when you're not relying on the body, you're going to see that you don't need this. You don't need the danger emotion at all. You're going to learn how to just charge off things that just are purely positive without any sense of danger to it, right? But if you don't know how, then I've noticed this, right? Because most people don't know how to charge their emotions in the way that, I don't want to say that I'm so special, but they don't know how to charge it in the way that I usually do it, right? So what they end up doing is they end up relying on this guy more to charge their emotions. But danger is not a purely positive emotion. It does feel a little bit pleasurable, but it doesn't have a purely good feeling. That'll make more sense later. But yeah, like for example, a good example is when you're in love, right? When you're truly in love, romantically in love, it just feels good. There's no feeling of danger or risk or none of that, right? That's how you generally want to charge your emotions. You don't need this guy. You don't want to rely on this guy only, because this is not entirely a positive emotion. That's why it leads to gambling and risky behavior that can hurt you and things like that. This is not good to rely on for your excitement. But again, since a lot of people don't know how to charge emotions, they generally do, and it's not good, right? But so the other thing I want to go over about this emotion, and this is kind of just important in terms of understanding society, is the danger emotion. It actually creates contrarian behavior and causes us to be attracted to things that are ostensibly bad or bad on the surface, right? So that's important because the way it works is basically you have to look at something, it has to be a mild threat to you. So in some way, it's going to be somewhat bad for you. It has to be, right? Otherwise, there's no feeling of danger, right? If it's too good, if it's too easy, you don't feel any threat assessment level, and then it's not really that dangerous to you. There's no threat. But then this feeling won't activate. So you have to be, when this feeling does activate, right, it's going to be in some situation that's a little bit risky or a little bit of a threat to you. But because it feels good, and it activates in that risky situation, it's actually going to cause you to be a little bit attracted to the bad situation. So, in other words, it creates our contrarian behavior. It creates behavior that should theoretically be opposite, right? And I see this everywhere all the time, right? So, just as an example, before I go here, Well, actually, no. Let me just say this one. So, men, I feel like this isn't a hard rule, right? But this is something I've noticed, and I feel like is how do I want to word it? I feel like it is a good rule. I wouldn't say a good rule of thumb, but I don't know what percentage to put to it. But you might find it to be true more often than not, right? It's not a hard rule, though. But I feel like men usually express contrarian behavior through entertainment media, and women usually, or more, I should say, men primarily or mostly express their contrarian behavior in entertainment media, and women will express most of their contrarian behavior in relationships and sexuality. So, for example, men like to watch movies, for example, like a James Bond movie where someone's killing other people, like that, which is bad, right? But they are doing it in the context of being a hero. But still, it's a little bit bad. But us men like to watch movies where there's some guy who's the main man. He's kind of selfish, right? Which is also bad, but he's kind of selfish. He's killing other people, shooting them, and might even like steal some things. But for us, it's fun, right? We still like it. Or you can even take an example of like Dark Knight, right? So Dark Knight with Batman, right? A lot of people love Joker. Joker's a terrible character, right? So he's killing people. He doesn't care about them. He has no empathy, no sympathy. He's completely immoral and unethical, but by most people's standards. But for some reason, people liked him. Why? People love Joker. There's Joker costumes, and people are getting like Joker's picture and poster. Why would they like something or someone that's so negative? It's because of this frequency. So when Hollywood is making movies, they don't want to make the villain or the character, especially in hero or superhero movies, right? They don't want to make the character too evil or too negative, because then it's not going to activate this danger emotion, right? The threat level or the threat assessment level has to be just right to activate this emotion. If it's too high, it's going to activate anxiety, and if it's not really there at all, which it can be for a movie because it's not real life, if it doesn't activate any of them, then it's just going to activate a purely negative frequency, and negative frequencies don't feel good. So that sometimes can happen with scary movies. They're just too evil, right? And you don't feel good watching them because they're causing you to produce an intention that just charges a purely negative frequency. And no negative frequency feels good. They all feel bad. There's no reason to intentionally charge them. That's what scary movies do. But the hero movies and superhero movies do it just right. They try not to make the villain seem too evil in the way... They try not to make it seem too evil in the way that you're watching it, because they try to get it just right to activate this emotion. And then when it happens, then you're going to now suddenly be attracted to the subject of that, the subject that's stimulating that negative emotion or the danger emotion, which is usually going to be the villain, right? What else do I want to say? In video games, right? So when you're in a video game, there's a whole bunch of people trying to attack you and take away your HP. So you shoot them and attack them back and things like that, and that's pretty bad, right? Like Grand Theft Auto, or when you go around basically shooting and killing innocent people, which that does impact people on the subconscious level, by the way. Some people say, oh no, video games don't make people do bad things in real life. Not alone, but it plants a subconscious message or a subliminal message in your subconscious. We'll talk more about subconscious memory later, because to understand that, you have to understand subconscious memory. But it does plant a message that makes you more comfortable with hurting people, right? So that's just how the subconscious works. So I just want to say that because some people debate that. I think absolutely stuff like movies in Hollywood with shooting people, in video games where you're shooting people and things like that, that absolutely plants messages into your subconscious that make you more comfortable doing that, right? So they have negative subliminal messaging. Whether it's intentional or not, they definitely do. But anyway, I just wanted to say that, for men, that's where a lot of our contrarian behavior is expressed. But that's what I've noticed, including like me, for one more thing, you see it in sports too, right? In sports, it's expressed in the risk of loss, right? Or violence. So if you're watching, let's say a basketball game, it's the championship, right? Sports is more interesting, and we'll talk more about this later, but sports is more interesting when there's a story to it, right? If a person has a really huge reputation and there's the risk of losing it, that's what makes it more interesting. Everybody likes to see two undefeated teams or two really successful teams come together and face each other, because there's ostensibly a huger opportunity of loss. So there's a bigger risk. That risk activates this danger emotion more. And so that's why it's always good when sports teams are like undefeated or nearly undefeated, because it's hard to see which one loses because there's a bigger risk of reputation involved. Right? If there's no risk of reputation, if they're both losers, they've lost all the time, you know what I mean? No one really cares, right? Because there's no danger emotion involved. There's no risk of anything. Same thing in boxing, right? So in boxing, when two fighters are undefeated and they're kind of going through their division and then they finally fight each other, there's a huge amount of risk in terms of the reputation. That makes it just more interesting because it activates this emotion, right? Or if you're just seeing the violence in the, in the fight, and the fighter is, really pounding like Triple G used to do that a lot, right? He used to like, I think at one point he had like a 92% KO ratio. Triple G is an animal, right? But the way he would fight, like it's like a lot of chicks, they think like, I remember I was talking to this chick, like they think like men are attracted purely to the violence of boxing. Like, no, it's not. I don't want to see just some random person get pummeled and see blood and everything. That's not what it is. There's more to it than that. There's a science to boxing, which is why they call it the sweet science. But there's also a way of perceiving boxing where you perceive it through this lens, even the violence of it. When you perceive it through this lens, then it's just enjoyable. So again, men will have contrarian behavior a lot of times through entertainment media. But what I noticed, and this may or may not be true, right? But what I've noticed is that women tend to lean a little bit different in terms of how they express the contrarian behavior that comes from this emotion. It's not a hard rule. It's not like they only do it in this way that I'm about to say, but they just have a slightly more higher affinity for expressing that behavior in these ways. So that's why women aren't always interested in like the hero movies or the karate flicks where people fight each other using martial arts or UFC or boxing, because men do that to entertain themselves through this emotion. But women, I've noticed, they do it in the form of relationships and sexuality. So what do I mean by that? Well, it's a little hard to explain, but I've noticed that women so first of all, the age-old, or it's way more than age-old, but the thing you usually hear is that women like bad boys, right? Where does that come from? Why do chicks like bad guys and the relationships always end terribly, right? But they keep going back to them. Why do they do that? Well, it's actually the same reason that men might like the villain in a movie, right? It's because of this frequency. When a person, one thing I actually haven't mentioned yet that I should mention is that the danger emotion, a lot of times, the danger emotion, on top of having a feeling and affecting what's logical to you, which helps you makes it logical to take a risk, on top of affecting your imagination, which, like you said, it puts it into binary thinking of success or failure, and you can immerse yourself in whatever the situation is that's risky. It does actually have an organizational pattern. So in other words, it affects kind of the way you move your body and the way you act, right? Now, the other frequencies weren't that important to talk about. Sexual emotions, obvious how that affects you, the way you move and the way you think and the way you try to create. The anxiety emotion is completely unimportant because it's not a good emotion. But the danger emotion, I've noticed it affects the way you talk, it affects the way you move your body, it affects what you're able to create. So it actually does have a useful sort of organizational pattern. And we normally call it cool, like, interestingly enough, right? So on the conscious level, a lot of times when people say cool, we'll talk more about how that works later. That's, again, I think, is that in chapter 7? No, I think I've talked about a little more about that in chapter 9. But we talked about some of it in chapter 7, some in chapter 9. But suffice it to say, when people are seeing something and they're saying it's cool, what they're really referring to in some way, shape, or form is a reflection of this frequency, right? That's why a person who's bad can be a little bit cool, right? And so, but getting back to this, or if a person's bad, or if they they like wear, like, let's say the Knight Rider look, right? Like, what about that makes it look cool, right? Because it's a little bit dangerous, right? It has a little bit of a dangerous feel to it, a projection to it, and that's basically what this emotion means. So this emotion has its own, we call it organizational pattern, but basically you could think of it as the way a person moves their body in terms of what they wear, what they say. It's a manifestation of that frequency, what the subconscious can always pick up on, but we'll talk about that later. But anyway, when women are attracted to bad boys, what it really means is that there's a slight threat to them, and that threat activates this frequency. That's why they're attracted to them. Now, the sexual emotion also, you can sort of combine, like before I was saying that the danger emotion doesn't mix well with the anxiety emotion in the body. This is not the mind, this is just the body. But the danger emotion does mix very well with the sexual emotion. But men don't really need that, right? So in order to combine the danger emotion and the sexual emotion, a lot of times when people cheat, right, there's a risk to it. So there's a thrill to it. That's why people cheat a lot of the times. It's exciting. But like I said, and that leads to negative outcomes. And the reason is because danger emotion is not really a positive frequency. It might feel a little pleasurable, but it's not really a pure positive frequency. So it can, when you rely on it, a lot of times it can go bad or go south in the end, because there is some threat available, which can harm you. You know what I mean? Even if you don't consider it in the moment a high threat assessment, right? So, but a lot of times when people cheat, right, the cheating aspect of it creates a danger component to it, and that danger component charges the emotion to make you more excited. And then when you mix that with the sexual emotion, it can also cause you to, it can also charge you to charge the sexual emotion even more. And then you mix both of them and you feel more passion, right? But again, it's not that good. So, but yeah, you can mix the sexual and danger emotion, but men don't really need to do that, right? Men aren't really that attracted to the bad woman. Like, they don't really care about that. Men get most of their contrarian expression to feel this emotion or entertain themselves through this emotion through media and adventure and stuff like that. But for whatever reason, women like it in relationships and sexuality. So a lot of times women will actually, it's like they almost require this for their sexuality. They don't like, a lot of times chicks don't like to try to charge sexual emotion without this feeling. I think it's harder for them. So we'll talk a little more about it in chapter 14, because I have a section about that. But I think that men charge sexual energy much faster, right, than women do. I think women, why that is I talk about in chapter 14, but I think women don't charge it as much, as quickly as men. It takes more effort. It charges a little bit slower than men. So they like to use this frequency to give it that boost, you know what I mean? So they can get into it more. And so that's where that comes from. Some men can do that too, right? There is a component, like some men do like cheating, right? I shouldn't say some, like there's a good amount that do, but they like, when they like cheating or, cheating on their chick, it comes from this, or even if they're not single, or if they're single, they might like to have another chick cheat on their spouse, right? Because it adds more danger to it. So they mix it with that frequency too. But I believe that most men don't. That's just kind of how I see it. But also, I think a woman can also get this contrarian behavior in relationships, any form of scandals, right? So this is just a stereotype, right? You know what I mean? I'll let the researchers determine how true it is. But girls like to, a lot of times you'll see girls more interested in like gossip, and they're more interested in like their own social status within a group, right? And they may gossip about the other women, and they may have catty behavior. And I think that's like kind of the idea behind shows like Housewives. I don't know how old that, I don't watch that stuff, but Housewives, right? So I see that sometimes. I never watched it, but based on the commercials, I would imagine that that's kind of the stuff they talk about, right? And so that's another example, and a lot of girls like that show, and guys watch it too, right? But a lot of girls watch those shows because it's just like a man, when the man's playing a video game and he's fighting, he's the warrior in the game and he's fighting the bad guys, right, and killing them, and has to beat the boss to get the, whatever, to save the town or whatever, right? That's how he vicariously experiences the danger emotion through entertainment media. For women, they vicariously experience a danger emotion through entertainment media that focuses more on relationship dynamics, right? Like catty behavior, talking trash about each other, stuff like that, among the chicks in some group. So that's my theory, right? I don't know how true it is. Like I said, I'll leave it to the researchers, but that's something I feel like I've noticed. So that's why the danger emotion is a very important emotion, because it's so universal. It's expressed, and it's not like, unlike sexuality, the anxiety is bad, so people just want to avoid that. Sexuality feels good, but the subject is too limited, so you can only express it in certain scenarios. The danger emotion you can express everywhere, and the body charges way faster than the mind, so a lot of entertainment media uses it, and even people, they unconsciously or subconsciously, they don't realize they're doing it. A lot of people consciously gravitate towards circumstances that will help them charge this danger emotion. But I'm saying, in my experience, that's largely because they don't know how to charge it. They don't consciously know how to charge the subconscious. Once you learn how to do it, you don't need this. Because this is, like I said, this is not really that good. It's not really that positive, even though it can feel a little bit enjoyable. This causes a huge amount of problems, especially spiritually, which we'll talk about that in the next book. This contrarian behavior causes all kind of problems spiritually, which we already talked about a little bit of it. It makes people more attracted to video games that are based on killing people. It makes you attracted to movies that have all types of bad things in it. It makes you attracted to cheating. Like, you know what I mean? So it's not a great emotion to rely on, right? When chicks are in relationships with bad guys, right, it always ends up bad, right? And then the reason for that is because emotions, we'll talk about it again in chapter 9 and 10, but the more you experience something, the more older it gets to you, the harder it is to stimulate you. And so once that's gone, the danger frequency, the ability to experience this enjoyable emotion in a relationship decreases over time. And then you're just left with purely negative feelings that don't feel good at all. That almost always happens when girls date bad boys. Once this emotion kind of gets harder to feel, then it's just purely negative emotions. And those, like I said again, I'm saying it again, there's nothing positive about them. They don't feel good. This is the only reason why negative emotions sometimes feel good. The moment this is gone, negative emotions are only negative. There's nothing that you might a little bit enjoy about them. They're purely negative. And that always happens to chicks where they date the bad guys. One thing I will say, again, I'll tell you about this a little in chapter 14. So a lot of times girls have trouble with nice guys, is because what I've learned is that, and I've experimented with this myself too, it's not that girls don't like nice guys, it's that they don't like boring guys, right? And I'm kind of going a little bit when I talk about chapter 14, because there's more things I want to say about it. But if a guy's nice, but he can still stimulate a girl's emotion, then she will be attracted to him, right? That's just how the subconscious works. There's not going to be someone who stimulates your emotion in a positive way, but you're not attracted. That doesn't even make sense, right? You're going to be attracted to them. Now, I'm not saying the girl will date that person. They may find them physically unattractive, but on some level, they're going to be attracted. And usually, that level of attraction is enough to get them to choose them as a mate or as a boyfriend. But the problem that I want to say about that, too, is that if the nice guy is not using this as the boost, remember what I said, it's harder to charge the subconscious without just through the mind alone. The body charges the subconscious way faster. So the bad boy has the advantage, right? If he's using this, then she's going to find him attractive much quicker and much faster. The nice guy is trying to attract her without this. You can still do it, and I've done it, and I've practiced it, right? You can do it, but it's much harder because you don't have that boost. Most guys don't know how to talk to chicks or how to stimulate their emotions. They're not trying to do that. They don't understand how the subconscious works. They're just trying to be nice. And that's completely boring because that's not going to be that emotionally stimulative, and that's not using this guy either. So it's just not stimulative. That's why girls are often not attracted to that. Guys, that's usually a blind spot for us guys, because we don't need this to be attracted to women. So we assume they're the same. But part of the reason, I believe, I'm kind of going on a tangent. I think about stuff like this all the time. Stuff related to the subconscious. But part of the reason for that, I think, is because, again, men can charge sexual energy very easily. It's no problem for us. So we don't need this at all. Women are not like that. It's harder for them to charge sexual energy to that peak level. And so this helps a lot. So this is very important for them. And so men have that blind spot where they don't realize that difference in men and women. So, yeah, that's just something I wanted to say. I probably should have made another video for some of this other stuff, but these are just my ideas. The last thing I want to say is that political parties often use this inherent contrarian behavior in their propaganda and subliminal messaging. So what I've noticed too is in politics, right? When politics, especially the Republican Party, right, they will use certain messages and political propaganda to sort of get you to be attracted to something that you feel like is kind of bad or shouldn't really make sense, but you feel you want to kind of stick it to a certain system, right? So in political party, as of the recording of this video, I don't know how long that sort of political culture will last. They talk a lot about wokeness or woke ideology, and I do agree. Wokeness started off as something that was positive, right? It had positive goals, right? Basically the goal was basically to spread awareness of certain injustices to certain groups of people in society. That was basically all that it was. And then it turned into something very toxic. We'll talk more, it'll make more sense later based on some of the things we talk about, but it's basically toxic positivity, right? Where you ostensibly say you want something that's positive, but you go through very negative means to enforce it, right? That's kind of what it turned into. But politically, you can still get someone to ostensibly say they're against certain things that are good, or if you paint certain things that are technically good in a certain bad light, like wokeness, you can induce contrarian behavior because there's a danger component to it. I feel like there just is for some of these principles. I'm probably not explaining it that well, but let me see if I can come up with an example. So like I don't really want to make these videos too political, but like DEI, for example, right? Which I never even heard of that until it was in politics, right? The idea of like trying to make a work environment more inclusive by hiring minorities or whatever, right? In principle, that's good, right? The idea diversity is generally a good thing, but if you propagandize it just the right way, you can create a kind of a contrarian nature. Well, you're like, no, now I'm against it because it's this, that, and the other thing. And that emotional stimulation from this frequency makes you more passionate, and it can actually make you more cemented in that political party just from doing that. Republicans tend to use it way more than Democrats. For whatever reason, Democrats, they don't know about that. This may just be like happenstance. Like neither party is technically trying to induce this emotion. But I've noticed that Republicans tend to induce it way more than Democrats. They just do in the messages that they produce. So it creates contrarian behavior, and that kind of keeps people, that larger amount of passion keeps people in their political party. Democrats probably, do Democrats have contrarian behavior politically? I'm trying to think. I think it's just different for Democrats, right? I'm thinking about the old ones who watch MSNBC versus young ones who would probably watch stuff online. Yeah, no, Democrats do have it. Yes, I'm like bugging. So Democrats definitely have contrarian behavior, but they do it slightly differently. Because some things that Republicans say, some policies, they do have some legitimate concerns, or they do make sense, right? I'm trying to think of an example. So a good example might be, is like immigration, right? So obviously the country can't just have infinite immigration, otherwise it would just, you know what I mean? It wouldn't, I forget who said it, was it Ronald Reagan? You don't have a country if you have that. There's not enough resources to support an infinite amount of people. It doesn't make any sense. Of course, you obviously have to stop immigration at some point, right? It doesn't make sense to have try to fit an infinite amount of people in a finite space. So of course you have to cap it, stop it, limit it, have certain rules on it, right? But what Democrats will generally do is they'll say, well, hey, if you're even for limiting immigration, right, then you're racist and you don't like this and you don't like that. So it can create a contrarian behavior in terms of now the danger is that you might be a bad person, right? And you don't like that. So now now it kind of changes the contrarian behavior, but the passion that usually comes out of this is to hate the other people who are bad. You're a good guy, right? You're not against minorities. So you're against you want to attack those people who are against the minorities by trying to limit immigration. But of course, not wanting an infinite amount of people to come into your country or where you live, that's a good thing because that'll destroy the country. Now, I don't even really believe in the idea of countries. I think that we're getting way ahead into the second book, but I think that every country eventually just needs to be one world under God, right? And everyone needs to have a relationship with God and Jesus Christ, and everything will just turn out the way. Spiritually, it doesn't even make sense to have countries. That means nothing, right? The only thing that ever mattered at all was your relationship with God and how aligned you are with the Spirit of God, right? But that doesn't really make any sense now in terms of subconscious. It's going to make more sense later. So I don't see there to be any purpose to countries. There's no meaning to them. It doesn't make sense for one country to have all these resources while another country doesn't. You don't get to just say, well, I don't care about that country if my country's good. It's not spiritual, right? There's always going to be problems. Down the line, that country's eventually going to try to come to your country or attack you or something, right? You're never going to be comfortable or happy, unless you bring yourself into alignment with the word or the will of God, which is going to be equality, you're always going to be focused on principles of egalitarianism. So you're going to want everyone to be comfortable and everyone to be happy. If you have too many resources, you give to this place, right? So everything kind of equals itself out and then everything's happy. That's how the Spirit of God would move in the world. But again, we're not really getting to spirituality. But just in terms of how people generally think about politics, right? The contrarian behavior with Democrats would be that they're attracted to the bad thing of letting an infinite amount of people into the country, or they're attracted to the bad thing of crime being everywhere and being okay with it, or having bums on the street, or homeless people, I should say. They're attracted to these ideas and they seem good to them or pleasurable because through them they make the person feel like they're a good person, but they do it through the danger frequency, right? And so both political parties basically use this as a form of basically mind control and subliminal messaging. So yeah, I went on way too long. I should have really put this in as 2 videos. I thought about it, but I didn't think it was going to go on that long. But this emotion's very important because it's universal, it's everywhere. So I just kind of wanted to really go over it. So I think there might be some other things I could talk about in terms of primal emotions, but I think these are the main ones. But we're almost up to chapter 5, where I talk more about the negative mind and positive mind in a more complete detail. So yeah, that's pretty much it, but thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.